All right, you guys, here's another Q&A. Like I said, as long as you guys keep sending in these questions, I'm just going to keep banging out these Q&As. So we'll just make this a consistent thing. So let's get straight to it. Nothing Stranger wants to know, how did you get released from the Santa Clara County Jail in 2012? I know they just didn't walk you out the front door and say, take care. And why don't you ever address the 5 years you spent in PC and main jail, as in who you were housed with, conversations you had, etc., etc. Foremost, I did talk about all this, both in my book and in past Q&As, but this isn't an area I routinely talk about either, because for one, I just didn't think that people cared to hear much about all that, and it's just not one of my go-to talking points that I really have an interest in bringing up either. But since you posed the question, I'll briefly go over it. So I'll just say that my time in PC was somewhat uneventful. I spent 4 of those 5 years locked up on a max tier because classification was skeptical about what I was going to do if they let me out around other inmates. You've got to remember, I wasn't all that accepting of throwing on that brown top for most of those years. So in their minds, my status wasn't really clear, and they didn't know what kind of intentions I had. It didn't help that I ended up getting implicated in an in-house murder either, a murder that was committed in the jail. This incident is mentioned briefly in my first book, and then I cover it extensively again in my second book, but this is the short version. So when they first isolated me and started taking steps towards flipping my classification status, they did it gradually, in baby steps, because like I said, they weren't 100% sure about what my intentions were, and they just didn't know how I was gonna act. Truth be told, I wasn't accepting of it, and I actually fought the transition for close to 3.5 years. So for the first 2 years, they kept me in an isolated observation cell by myself. After 2 years, they moved me to an area called Little Max in 3rd West. To them, it was a big step, as it was the first time they put me on a tier with other inmates who were also in brown. But even then, they were still very selective of who these guys were, as they knew I definitely wasn't going to allow myself to be housed near or around any undesirables, meaning chomos, sexual deviants, or any of them other weirdos that have been charged with them foul types of crimes. So Little Max consisted of 3 cells and a shower. When they escorted me to that tier, there was a young white kid named Joseph Booth who had an identity crisis. One day he was a skinhead dropout, the next day he was a Nazi lowrider dropout. One of the other guys was an older guy from Fresno. He wasn't even a bulldog. He was a square family type of dude who was there just based on the fact that he was from Fresno. And the third guy was a guy from Southern California who just wanted to do his time. I don't know if I'd even call him a dropout. I'd just say he was an older guy who just wanted to do his time. Trust me, they were nobodies. The one thing I will say that I learned about that environment is that when most of these guys decide to drop out or lock it up, they lose all sense of self-respect and just completely lose tune with all their morals, principles, and any level of dignity that they once exhibited when they were active. They sleep all day, they stop keeping up with their hygiene, they lose all motivation to work out, they stop maintaining their cells, and then they just spend the entire day acting out, cell soldiering, throwing feces, and doing all kinds of other oddball shit. Imagine this, it was almost like I was the only one who was still active on that tier. All day these cats would have their lights out, they'd be sleeping, on medication, they'd never work out, and they just acted like kids. At 5 a.m., my lights would be the only light on. My mattress would be rolled up, my cell would be immaculate. I'd work out every day and I still maintain the same level of self-respect that I did when I was still active. I was still programming, but these fools were straight slouches. Anyways, whenever these guys would start bickering or would start arguing over their petty little gripes, like when one would want to watch cartoons and the other one would want to watch goddamn Brady Bunch or something like that, I'd always be the voice of reason and I'd intervene for the purpose of resolving it, just to get these fools to shut up. Most of the time it would be just as simple as saying, hey bro, let him watch his cartoons for an hour and at 3:30 I'll turn it for you. Well, at some point the youngster was going through one of his little hissy fits and started up with the Southerner over the TV. When I tried to intervene to get them to stop, the white kid tried to involve me by telling me that I should have his back since he was from Northern California and that I should stop communicating with the Southerner because of their conflict. Needless to say, I wasn't about to let anyone up there, let alone this kid, dictate who I chose to interact with, and I told him this. This ended up making him turn on me, and despite the fact that I tried to talk some sense into this idiot, now he started threatening to throw piss and feces on the tier. This obviously upset me, but I knew how to handle this kid, and I did it with psychological warfare. Weeks prior, he had sent me an envelope with some paperwork that had his home address on it, and it was an easy address to remember. All I did was get on the phone so he could hear me and act like I was calling someone for the purpose of sending them to his house to lay everyone in the house down. Basically, I led him to believe that I was having somebody go over there to take out his family. I literally just said, "Hey, homie, remember that house I told you about over there on Aborn Street? We'll go over there and put them all to sleep." I knew exactly what he'd do if I did that, and he bit like a big mouth bass. I knew that he'd get himself moved off the tier, and that's what he did. He started banging on his gate and yelling for the COs to come back there. When they did, he said he needed to talk to someone because I sent people to his mom's house to kill his family, and he wanted to be pulled out so he could talk to classification. So that's what happened. I go more into some of the details that will make more sense in my book, but for now, let me just say this. Yes, I was upset because he threatened to start gassing people back there. Gassing is throwing a cup or some kind of container full of urine and feces at someone when they walk in front of your cell. But this didn't rise to the level of me wanting to kill him. Trust me, I had bigger fish to fry than this confused kid. So about a week or two after this incident, they ended up finding this kid's body on the tier. He had been beaten and his head was basically smashed. Before they even came onto the tier to get his body, there were about 5 or 6 kites sticking out of the bars from different cells from inmates who were implicating me in this murder. It was ridiculous. They all made these allegations simply based on the fact that I had a prior incident with them. Of course, the newspapers and the defense attorneys all ran with it and gave it some life, but there was nothing to substantiate this besides these guys making baseless assumptions. On top of all that, this kid's mom filed a $20 million lawsuit and got breaded out. So, like I said, my second book covers it extensively and I go into all the details. So for now, that's all I'm going to say on it. As far as how I was released in 2012, no, they just didn't open the doors and tell me to beat it. They were a little more involved than that. Again, this is something I cover in my second book, but here's another short version. So because of the circumstances, I was given the option to go into the Federal Witness Protection Program, but I opted out of that. Just didn't want to go through all the drama I heard was attached to that program. Instead, I agreed to go into the county's relocation program. It's nothing crazy. It's funded by the district attorney's office from whatever county the case took place in, and that's all it basically is. So prior to getting released, you pick a county where you think you'll be compatible living in. They transport you to that county, put you up in a long-term hotel that you can live in, such as an extended stay or a residence inn, a room with a kitchen. They agree to pay your rent for up to a year or two, and that's basically it. The only requirement that you're bound by is that you can't enter or go within 50 miles of the county the incident happened in. Other than that, they give you a monthly per diem for food, which isn't a whole lot, about $450. And then they provide you with the P.O. box to get your mail sent to, and a phone. The phone is just to maintain contact with a rep from their office, just in case you need something and to make arrangements with that rep so that he can come by and drop off your mail. Yep, mail service, free room and board, free local call-only phone, and free groceries. So that pretty much sums it up right there. When I got released, they transported me to the hotel, gave me my room, keys, and then cut tread. I think this is by far the longest reply I've ever given to one of these questions. So Fernando Califas wants to know, I've always noticed that Stockton had a bad reputation of red-on-red crimes, snitches and dropouts being overlooked because they were well respected or made a lot of money. Is this something you've ever seen play out in your neck of the woods? Also, were these kinds of issues in Stockton something discussed on a higher level? Yeah, Stockton ain't special in that regard. This is a problem that seems to develop almost everywhere. Most of the time, some of the bigger cities like Stockton, Modesto, San Jose, Sacramento, San Francisco, Oakland, Santa Rosa, Salinas, etc., just have a heavier presence of dropouts and other people who have become targets because there's more activity out there. It's simple. The more activity, the more homeboys that are active and who are out there in the mix, consequently generate more of those who fall into bad favor. Stockton has always produced a lot of homeboys who are active and who function within those circles. So of course, at times, there's going to be a heavy presence of those types of individuals out there. In my neck of the woods, sure, this is a problem that's occurred throughout the years in the city too. In the early 90s, San Jose was experiencing this same kind of problem. That's why Dump Truck paroled with a long hit list of NF dropouts and targets that leadership wanted to be killed as soon as he got his feet planted. A lot of times, it's just a mere coincidence, too, that a lot of these individuals just start paroling all at around the same time and they start to saturate the streets. As far as being discussed, of course, anytime there seems to be a heavier than normal presence and it begins interfering with the street regiments, that's when people start getting killed out there. So Angel Perez wants to know, what's up, Boxer? Do you know what happened to Joker Mendoza? Nobody ever brings him up. I heard he was killed by a bulldog and that he came up with the NF symbol. Do you know if there's any truth to that? Yeah, I did hear that he had something to do with creating the NF symbol, but I can't tell you for sure on that. But yeah, Frank Joker Mendoza was from Redondo Beach and was involved in the whole Chicano social movement back in the 1970s. At one point, Joker was transferred from Soledad State Prison and was one of the first inmates in the California prison system to be expelled from a prison due to his role in a racial brawl that took place in Soledad. It was later said that Joker became an ardent supporter of the MA while he was housed in San Quentin. But in 1971, while incarcerated in CIM facility in Chino, he met Cheyenne Cadena, where he had apparently or allegedly requested membership into the MA but was supposedly denied. This may not be propaganda generated by the MA in an effort to assassinate his character. I can't be sure either way, but what I do know is that after he was transferred to Tehachapi, he was recruited by an NF member, Manuel Manito Romero. Joker would then become one of the most aggressive NF members in NF history. In December of 1972, while housed in Palm Hall, he was one of a squad of NF members who participated in the stabbing and killing of Rudy Cheyenne Cadena. When the NF discovered Black Jess Valenzuela had worked as an FBI undercover informant, it was Joker, accompanied by Babo Sosa, who stabbed him to death. Joker would later drop out of the NF due to internal politics and met his death at the hands of Fresno Bulldogs gang dropout Anthony Diablo Delgado, who was Joker's cell partner. While the two were housed in protective custody in 2002, Diablo strangled him to death. Diablo is currently on San Quentin's death row. So Ala Butters wants to know, hey Boxer, so I get it, you talked to your old co-defendants about the level 1 and 2 yards, but I mean, come on. If those active dudes stayed there, then they ain't active anymore. You won't see those dudes on the GP yard anymore. We don't program with trash, bro. We still have individuals go to these yards that do get off. My little brother recently had to get off at a level 1. So no, regardless of what your old co-defendants say, there are no actives on those yards, level 1 and 2. Look, brother, it's not my intention to spread false propaganda or mischaracterize what's been happening out there on some of these main lines. I'm just not on that kind of trip. And I just ain't that bitter. But I've talked to multiple people who are out there right now who have all told me the same thing. In all fairness, I'm going to give more details and all the facts so I can present it for everyone to see for themselves. I don't doubt what you're saying, trust me, I don't. But it's a proven fact that CDCR has instituted a pilot program where they started merging some of the level 1 and 2 yards together. I couldn't believe it myself, nor did I think CDCR would implement a policy to get rid of the S and Y yards, but it's happening. And I'm not just talking about stragglers, one here, one there. I'm talking about several individuals. I'll find out what yard it was, but on one of these yards, I was told that they were out there together and that some of the actives had just basically told these other cats to stay within a certain perimeter or they risk being hit. In other words, you stay on your side of the yard and we'll stay on our side. So this sounds like they're programming together and have come to an agreement to coexist. I'll press these individuals and I'll lay out all the facts that I find out. And if I get any bad info, I'll put a disclaimer out there and correct whatever it is that's wrong. Again, I'm not bashing on anyone active, bro. I still interact with a lot of people who are still on good standing, so that's not my intention. As soon as I finish looking into it, I'm going to drop something more in depth on this whole subject because it's definitely generating a lot of interest right now. So Ivan Mendoza wants to know, Skip only had 14 years in the feds. Once that was up, he would be returning to the state. Why wouldn't he want to get back to the state and handle those that turn their back on the federal faction? Wouldn't you think he would want to have that vato killed by someone else? Because he would have his eyes on getting back to the state because that's where it's at. Could it be that Skip was like, fuck it, I'll kill in the feds and I'll do life in the feds as it looks easier than state? Or maybe he went back to the state as he doesn't have manpower to back him up. Damn, boy, you covered every damn possible scenario. I'm sure you got one of them right. No, seriously. I doubt Skip was putting a whole lot of emphasis on going back to state or wasting his time thinking about getting any kind of retribution on those in Cali who betrayed the federal faction. I think Skip's focus was on setting an example and taking this dude's win. Besides that, their state sentences were commuted, so once Skip came up for parole in the feds, he was out. Commuting or vacating their state sentences was part of their sentencing agreement, so Skip would have been hitting the streets. This was detailed in Skip's profile. He took 14 years in the 1992 state indictment, and then again, he took another 14 years again in Operation Black Widow. So Michael Christopher wants to know, Boxer, you mentioned on here that you were contributing 10 to 15,000 a week, and we have heard on other channels linked to past NF members that in certain yards 10 to 20,000 is being made a week. However, in wiretaps and such, the generals and higher up captains seem to sometimes almost beg for money from friends and family to be put on the books. We don't see Norteños or NF guys on the street seemingly having nice homes and cars, or even for that matter, semi-nice homes and cars. They live in the hood in shit places with shit cars and so forth. What are they driving, darts? Damn, man, shit cars. Is the money thing actually accurate, or is this all Hollywood? Where's the money going if seemingly no one gets to have it? This just doesn't add up. Okay, let me see if I can make sense of this for you. First things first, be selective about what you choose to believe when hearing it on some of these other channels. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and then there's other people who seem to think that they're qualified to give an intelligent answer just because they were once a part of something. So with regard to what I was personally contributing when I was out there, I believe I said I was contributing anywhere from 10 to 15,000 every 2 weeks. I mean, it's technically not even an issue, but when it comes to things I say, I'm a stickler for accuracy. No, I don't think it's Hollywood or hyped up at all. Truth be told, when everything's clicking and all the different regiments in Northern California are generating money like they're supposed to be, it can be anywhere up from 70 to 100,000 a month, easy, collectively. I'll be honest, and this isn't arrogance or ego speaking. The regiments aren't being anywhere near as productive as they were when I was out there. Different times and a different game. Meth was our biggest staple, and people weren't as scared as they are these days. And I believe it was a different breed of C's who were controlling the streets at that time. For example, prior or even during Operation Black Widow, some of the regimental commanders that were out there were myself, Pocky from Salinas, Charlie Camper from Hollister, Smokey from Salinas, Goose from San Jose, Baby Joker from Watsonville, Chewy from San Francisco, Chico from Salinas, and Mikeo from Salinas. Those are just a few. On top of all that, there was a lot of other C's and N's that were just producing a lot of money out there. It was a lot different than it is now. I know because I was the one who was responsible for doing all the networking out there. So just imagine all the major big cities in Northern California, all the way up and down to Central California in the Valley. Each big city had an RC that was working and generating money. Not all of them were top tier regiments. The amount of money they were making just depended on the number of manpower they had underneath them and the resources that they had out there. Now, as far as why the generals sounded like they were broke and begging for money and it not making sense, attribute this to timing. It's when those calls were placed. They sounded broke at that time because they were. They lost control of all the money that was being generated from those regiments after they were moved to the feds, and this basically left them with nothing. It left them to fend for themselves, the same way they left the three brothers on death row to fend for themselves after they were convicted and sent to death row. While they were fighting their case, Operation Black Widow, and they were housed at the Glenn Dyer detention facility in Oakland, they were balling. Their bank accounts were packed out and they were basically sandbagging that money. They weren't sending nothing up to the other members who were still in Pelican Bay. But once they were transferred out, Pelican Bay reorganized its leadership, appointed a new high command, and they sent out mandates to all the C's and N's in California, advising them all to stop communicating with the prior leadership. And they also advised them that they no longer held any authority over California street regiments. So that's why they were begging for crumbs, because they finally had their water cut off. But the one thing that hasn't and won't change is how the money's controlled and regulated by those at the top. I've said it many times before and I'll say it again. There is no trickle-down effect. There's only a trickle-up effect. That money's controlled by leadership and it's distributed tightly within that circle. It's not divvied up and allocated to the less fortunate members and those who either have it coming or who are deserving of it. That's a smokescreen. I know because I function on a level that gave me a vantage point to where I could see how it all works. Not many can say the same, so they continue to believe that this money is being generated for a righteous and dignified purpose. Hopefully this gives you a clear perspective and helps you understand how it all really works. So Sandman wants to know, hey B, can you do a profile on my OG, Gary Anthony Romero, aka Pizza de Stockton? I sent mines, my boy. Yes, sir, I'll put that on the list. So California W wants to know, so after Mateo and Baby Joker got hit in the state by the state faction, since those two are part of the federal faction, where do they end up housing them? My guess is those two won't drop out since they've been in it for years. Can't recall if Chente was also hit. What role do you think Salinas plays in this? Hey, you guys need to keep in mind that I'm typing this out exactly the way that you guys are typing it. So if I'm struggling reading it, it's because I don't understand this shit. It just depends on a few different things, but I wouldn't be so quick to assume that they wouldn't drop out just based on the fact that they've both been in it for years. That don't mean shit. That means absolutely nothing at the end of the day. These guys, there's been guys that have been in the organization for 30 years that have dropped out, so this isn't even a factor. It can get real lonely and cold outside, and nobody's beyond taking that walk of shame. It's just going to depend on where their heart's at. If they feel like it's over and they want to completely separate themselves, then I'm sure that that's what they'll do. But if they still feel like the federal faction are standing firmly behind them, or like they're on some kind of rebirth mission or something, then I'm sure they'll keep pushing. They can still be housed anywhere, and I don't see this changing unless they formally tell the administration that they want to officially call it quits and drop out. As far as Salinas, where they might stand, You can just never be sure about Salinas. Trust me on that one, man. Loyalty is spread so many different ways, it's crazy. I do know this though. If there was ever anyone else out there who held half as much influence and prestige in Salinas as Mikio did, I'd have to say it was Mateo. He has a lot of history. There's a lot of people who look up to him out there, and he's got a big family. It's going to be interesting to find out though. As far as Chente, I heard he was in trouble, but I can't be sure either way. So real quick, before I answer the next question, I just want to get to this disclaimer that I said I was going to make. I just recently did a profile on Sheldon Skip Villanueva from San Jose, and there was a couple things that were said in the profile that I need to address. I mentioned that Skip's boy, Robert Ponyboy Maris, just recently passed away from what was said to be an overdose. Out of an abundance of caution for not generating bad or bogus information, I need to correct this. I was told by someone else that Ponyboy passed away from an overdose. However, I have not been able to substantiate this, so I can't stand behind it. Other sources have told me that he died from cancer, so this is what I'm correcting. The last thing I want to happen is for one of his relatives to stumble across something like this and it not being true. I have no interest in tarnishing his loved ones' memories, so this disclaimer serves to correct any misinformation or misstatements that weren't accurate. So Franco Lifano wants to know, who was the baddest NF and MM member you ever met? I'm not keeping tally. I've met some straight killers on both sides, but if I had to narrow it down to a few individuals in particular, as far as Emme, I'd have to say that Alfred Big Chato Sandoval from Maravilla was probably someone who stood out to me. He's a little older now, but about 10 to 15 years ago, when he was still on death row, he was a savage. As far as NF, I'd have to say myself, hands down. I can just imagine how many of you are laughing and telling me to shut the fuck up right now. Relax, I'm kidding. As far as NF, I'd have to say that Cornelius Corny Tristan from Woodland is known for being a straight killer. So Mikhail Cadena wants to know or wants to say, my uncle was Geronimo Garza from Salinas. Can you do a Q&A on how you felt about the whole situation of what happened to him? As far as my personal feelings, I'll be honest with you. I'm not sure I ever had a personal opinion about that one way or the other. I'm just being honest. I didn't know your uncle, but I did know Lobo. What I can say is this. I know for a fact that Lobo and Smiley were both doing all kinds of foul shit in Salinas and that they were both throwing their weight around. I had the unfortunate honor of having to deal with all of their fallout and all the chaos that they caused out there when I took over the Salinas Regiment between 2001 and 2003. Because of all the foul shit they did out there, like killing Mikio, killing your uncle, amongst other things, nobody wanted to work with the NF on the streets. It took me a long time to break down those barriers and get people back to the point where they wanted to get back on track with us out there. The picture I inserted above should bring you some comfort. The picture I inserted above should bring some comfort to you, as this is Lobo when he had one of his testicles shot off. Coincidentally, your uncle allegedly made a derogatory comment about this incident, and that was Lobo's reasoning for having him killed. I definitely don't think your uncle should have died for speaking his mind, because I'm sure a lot of people shared his same view and made similar comments themselves. Lobo lost the respect of the streets and those who knew him due to his own actions. So he was deserving of everything that was said about him and about all those who found enjoyment in his pain or the fact that he lost half of his teabag. At any rate, your uncle's in a better place now, so hopefully enough time has lapsed so that you and your family have had ample time to completely heal from this and that you have all gotten past your loss. So Moral MK wants to know, can you do a profile on Tomas Chopo McIntosh? That would be cool since you two have history. Yeah, I'll put Chopo on the profile list in the very near future. So Miguel Perez wants to know, what's up, B? What can you say about G Money? Gabe G Money Caracheo from Salinas was my boy. I had a lot of history with this guy and held him in high regard. When I wasn't with Bubba, Wino, or Smokey out there, I was with G Money. I don't know how good you knew him, but we used to kick it at that house he inherited right there in Prunedale off the freeway. I know he took somewhere between 24 and 28 years in Operation Valley Star. This is a picture of him in the feds wearing the shades. So Street Justice 609 wants to know, is Skip's neck blacked out to cover up ink, or is he just that blasted it looks that way? Either way, the dude's got some work on him. Nah, it ain't no cover up. That's just ink on top of ink. Skip's either one of them indecisive tattoo lovers, or he just keeps changing his mind about what he wants. Or he's just one of them guys that puts on a new shirt every 15, 20 years. So Richard Santos wants to know, I have a question. Do you have PTSD? It seems living that treacherous, scandalous lifestyle would take a toll on one's health physically and mentally. Just listening to all the backstabbing, greed, lies, betrayal, senseless murders. For instance, the D facility dilemmas. Good dudes getting taken out for a certain person's orders, thinking they're in compliance with the organization. The Brown Bobs, I think that's his name, situation. Man, it's hard to believe someone would come out of all that and not be scarred in some way. Yeah, I've actually talked about this before. Long stretches in the shoe not only create character flaws like being antisocial, being an introvert, anxiety, and anger triggers, but they also fuck you up and sometimes cause bigger problems like PTSD, paranoid schizophrenia, chronic depression, and sensory deprivation disorder. I honestly didn't know how bad the shoe was affecting me psychologically until I paroled the first time after being in the shoe for a long stretch. I almost freaked out and had an anxiety attack. I locked myself inside and just wanted to go back to prison. That's how I knew I was also institutionalized. I felt like I was out of my element and didn't know how to act in society. Alcohol became one of my coping mechanisms. It always took me around 3 or 4 months before I started transitioning back out and remembering how to interact. But when I'd first get out, I struggled. Sometimes I'd be standing in line and all of a sudden I'd feel like everyone was staring at me. My palms would start sweating and I'd get uncomfortable. And back then, the only way I knew how to deal with being uncomfortable is by being aggressive. But then I'd just be like, what the fuck you looking at? So my ass needed to find ways to calm down. Like you said, those environments are full of hostility and anger. You're living in a war zone where 1 minute you could be watching TV and the next minute you could be out there on the tier in a fight for your life. The thing I really had to adjust to was sound and my awareness. I know it sounds funny, right? My awareness was peaking so high that I was used to always watching or listening to everything that was going on around me. In the shoe, you can't see nothing but a concrete wall, so you train your ears to be your eyes. Everything's based on sound. You know what door opens because of how it squeaks. You know what the control booth is doing because of sound. You know when that front sally port door opens because of how it squeaks. You know what your neighbors are doing because of sound, etc., etc. So when you train your senses to do this, it's almost complete overload when you step back out. You try watching everything moving at the same time. Birds, cars, people, trees, different colors. In prison, I fine-tune my senses like this to stay alive. But it's almost like you have to find a way to taper it all back down once you get back out. I've gotten better over time, but I think I'll always be affected somehow, some way, because I was institutionalized.